When we need food, we just run down to the grocery store or restaurant. But have you ever thought about how they did it in the old days? They didn't have grocery stores, except maybe general stores, and it wasn't anything like we have today. I'm a transplant, but my wife's family has lived right here in Appalachia for hundreds of years. But even modern Appalachians are forgetting how to have food security. It was a hard life back in the day. The mountain people grew, gathered, hunted, raised, and preserved all their own food. In the mountains, just like most of the world back in the day, root cellars were seen on every homestead. If dug deep enough, they wouldn't get warmer than 65 or so in the summer, but usually they were just deep enough to keep large harvests of apples, cabbages, and root crops like potatoes from freezing in the winter. They were built out of logs or rock until later years when concrete block became popular. Canned jars of food were often stored in root cellars because it would keep jars from freezing and breaking in the winter. And canned food gets mushy if it gets too warm in the summer. And it was probably a handy place to store the canned food out of the house. Their houses weren't as big and didn't have as much room back then. When I was growing up, my mom would can hundreds of quarts of vegetables and fruit and meat every year. I was just one out of 9 kids, and I'm sure we ate them out of house and home, but if we ran out of something, we'd just get it at the store, which wasn't easy or may have even been impossible for a lot of the mountain people. They had to make sure they had plenty of food preserved before winter. Another building kind of like a root cellar was a spring house. Usually a small building made of stone was built over a spring, and it was a form of refrigeration. They would keep milk and other perishables in there, but not everyone was lucky enough to have a spring house because there were more people than springs. Food that you didn't have to preserve was best, so most old-timers had a milk cow or two. So they had fresh daily food, milk. Another great one was chicken. It was small and the whole chicken could be eaten in one meal. But chicken was usually saved for special occasions. And of course there were fresh eggs every day. The other building that was on all homesteads was the smokehouse. Me and my wife went to Andrew Jackson's Hermitage in Nashville recently, and he had a smokehouse there that was as big as a log cabin in the Appalachians, or even bigger, where they would cure 20,000 pounds of pork every year. Well, of course, the Appalachian people wouldn't cure that much for their small homesteads. Pork was a staple, and when the weather got cold enough, they would cure large amounts of pork with salt and sugar, and then hang the meat in the smokehouse. The last 3 or so years I've been curing our own bacon, and it's so much better than store-bought. When you eat some, you don't really ever want store-bought bacon again. Here's probably the most essential food storage building, the corn crib. Corn was their main diet and the only grain they had available to feed to animals. The corn was shucked but stored on the ear, and the corn crib was usually built out of logs without chinking, or built with widely spaced boards so there was airflow to continue drying the corn and to keep it from molding. Rats were a huge problem because wire mesh wasn't available back in the day, so spring rat killings were a necessity, and I'm sure barn cats were a huge help throughout the year as well. With corn being such a large part of their diet, they ate it in quite a few ways. The first corn they ate in the year was roasting ears, like we eat sweet corn on the cob, but this was before our modern sweet corn. When I was a kid, me and my brothers grew some Indian corn, and we went and ate it while it was still green on the cob, roasted over our campfire, and we thought it was the best corn we ever had. Then later on in the year, after the corn dried, they used it for cornmeal and hominy. Hominy was important because on a corn-based diet, your body would lack essential nutrients and you could get a disease kind of like scurvy, and soaking corn in lye or ashes would release more nutrients so you don't get that disease. It swelled the corn and popped it out of its shell, and you'd be left with a white, unshelled, nutritious corn that they cooked numerous ways. If you ground hominy like cornmeal, it was called grits, still very much only a southern food. Of course, they canned a lot of food once mason jars became available in the mid to late 1800s, but another way of preserving meat that we don't hear of today is they could cook any kind of meat, but usually just pork or sausage patties, and once it was cooked, they would put it in a large crock, and then they'd pour hot lard over it, and it would last for at least 6 months. They just get out what they needed and cover the rest with lard again. Pretty cool. And I also want to talk about this book right here. It is the Foxfire book. There's actually a whole series of them. This is the first one in 12. These were written in the 70s. They were put together by high schoolers back in the Back to the Land hippie movement. And they went to the last of the bona fide Appalachians and interviewed them and took pictures and watched them as they were like doing hog killings. And they put down very detailed information. And I'll just read off what this first book is about. It says hog dressing, log cabin building. mountain crafts and foods, planting by the signs, snake lore, hunting tales, faith healing, moonshining, and other affairs of plain living. So if you want to do moonshining, it's all in here. Shows you how to build the still. They're very detailed books. I highly recommend, if you can't afford it, to at least get this first one. And if you can afford it, get the whole series. I'll leave a link down in the description and in the comments. Thanks for watching, and God bless.